Hey, you're back. Thank you for being here. My name is Thomas Watson, and this is by far the most famous bobblehead in the world, Thomas Jefferson. On this episode of Jefferson's Salute to the Presidents, you'll be in for a real treat as the two of us feature the incredible life of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. But since the bobblehead and I have visited so many sites associated with Honest Abe, we've been forced to present Lincoln's life story into two unforgettable parts. So if you're ready, please sit back, grab a gingerbread man, one of Abe's simple pleasures, and enjoy the show. This is the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historic Park, which is on the grounds where Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809. Abraham was born on his parents' Sinking Spring farm, which got its name from this spring below me. There were 56 steps leading up to the memorial in the distance. Those steps represented Lincoln's age at the time of his death. President Theodore Roosevelt laid the cornerstone of this memorial on February 12, 1909, while President William Howard Taft was present for the dedication ceremony 2 years later. Once I was carried inside the memorial, I saw this cabin, which represented the one where Lincoln was born. For years, historians believe this cabin was built using logs from Lincoln's birth cabin. Modern science proved the logs were from around 1848 and not earlier than 1809. Even though this cabin was not the original birthplace, it was still an awesome experience to stand on the grounds where greatness was born. When young Abe was 2 years old, he moved with his family to their Knob Creek farm, which was located only a few miles from the Sinking Spring farm. Lincoln lived at this farm until he was 7 years old. This cabin I'm standing on was a replica, although the logs used in its construction were from the cabin of a neighbor who once saved Abraham from drowning. After Thomas Lincoln lost his land in Kentucky, he moved his family into Indiana in 1816 when Abraham was 7, and they settled in the Little Pigeon Creek community located near this site. The Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial featured the site where the Lincoln's cabin once stood and where Abraham Lincoln lived until he was 21 years old. 2 years after moving here, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, Abe's mother, became ill with what was believed to be milk sickness, and she died a short time later on October 5, 1818, at the age of 34. 9-year-old Abraham Lincoln helped his father make Nancy's coffin by whittling the wooden pegs that held the planks together. The log structures behind me, located on the Lincoln Living Historical Farm, were surrounded by crops and pastures that recreated the 1820s homestead. In the 1820s, Thomas Lincoln could have constructed a cabin such as this one in 4 days. After I posed on the window ledge of this replica cabin, I was carried down a long path where I ended up at the Pioneer Cemetery to visit the gravesite of Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Following the death of Abraham Lincoln's beloved mother on October 5, 1818, she was buried in the Pioneer Cemetery not far from Abe's boyhood home. Once Thomas had taken his wife's remains to this cemetery on a sled, Nancy Lincoln was interred here without a formal religious service. A little over a year after Nancy's death, Thomas Lincoln married widow Sarah Bush Johnston on December 2, 1819. This 162-acre state park, known as the Lincoln Trail Homestead State Memorial, is believed to be where the Lincoln family first settled in Illinois after they left their home in Indiana behind. In March 1830, Thomas Lincoln arrived on the north bank of the Sangamon River, where he decided to settle with his extended family, including his 21-year-old son, Abraham. The Lincolns worked hard. After they constructed a small 18 by 18-foot cabin, they planted a large crop of corn. The Lincolns log home in 1830. This was also the site where Abraham Lincoln got the nickname the Rail Splitter. He split rails for his father's farm and made extra money by making split rail fences for other farmers as well. The harsh winter of 1830-31 was devastating on the Lincolns, and it caused them to move away after just 1 year. When Abe's father and stepmother moved 70 miles to the south, the 22-year-old future president left his family for good. Lincoln was hired to pilot a flatboat on the Sangamon River, which is behind me. A short time later, the rail splitter ended up in New Salem, where he made a name for himself. This reconstructed village is Lincoln's New Salem State Historic Site, located near Petersburg, Illinois. After 22-year-old Abraham Lincoln set out on his own as the pilot of a flatboat on the Sangamon River, he stopped and settled in New Salem, which was founded in 1829. During his stay, which lasted roughly 6 years, Lincoln earned a living as a shopkeeper, soldier in the Black Hawk War, general store owner, postmaster, land surveyor, and rail splitter, as well as doing odd jobs around the village. The first two buildings I saw during my visit were the Henry Onstott Cooper Shop, which was the only original building on the site, and Onstott's residence, which was located alongside his shop. The two-room log cabin owned by Henry Onstott featured stone fireplaces, brick hearths, and iron locks. My favorite building at the New Salem site was the Onstott Cooper Shop, mainly because it was the only original structure in the reconstructed village. Henry Onstott, the village cooper, made barrels, buckets, butter churns, and wash tubs in this shop. The Onstotts claimed Abraham Lincoln studied his law books by the fire at night inside this very shop. As I stood near the fireplace in the Onstott Cooper shop, I envisioned young Lincoln and Onstott's oldest son as they studied together by the light from the fire kindled by Cooper's shavings. Those shavings helped kindle Abe's law career as well. The original store on this site was built by James and Rowan Herndon in the fall of 1831. William Barry bought James Herndon's interest in the summer of 1832, and soon after, Abraham Lincoln bought Rowan's share on credit. Stores were popular gathering places where merchandise was bought and stories were swapped, which ranged from weather to politics. Berry and Lincoln operated the store until a larger store with better stock opened up across the street, which they moved to in January 1833. Visitors were not allowed inside the Berry Lincoln store, but my photographer captured this image through an opening in the front door. The next stop on my journey through the streets of New Salem was the Hill McNeil store. Samuel Hill built the original log building in 1829 with John McNamara, also known as McNeil, as his business partner. The Hill McNeil store not only sold merchandise, but the building also served as New Salem's post office. Samuel Hill served as postmaster until Andrew Jackson appointed Abraham Lincoln as postmaster in 1833. After I was placed on the replica cabinet inside the Hill McNeil store, I noticed two wooden shingles behind me which stated Abraham Lincoln was postmaster of New Salem, Illinois, and deputy surveyor of Sangamon County. As I headed from the Hill McNeil store to the second Berry Lincoln store further down the road, I had my first thoughts about Anne Rutledge in New Salem. It turned out store owner John McNeil was once engaged to the young Rutledge girl. However, when McNeil traveled to New York to bring his family back to Illinois, he got sick and was away for 3 years. During McNeil's absence, Abe Lincoln fell in love with Anne and likely would have married her had she not died from typhoid fever on August 25, 1835. I'm standing in front of the second Berry Lincoln store, which was originally built in 1829. This store was the only wood frame house in New Salem, while the rest of the buildings were constructed from logs. In their larger store, Lincoln and Berry sold general merchandise such as apparel, dry goods, hardware, home furnishings, and a selection of food, including takeout meals for stage passengers. For a short time, the two men were thriving merchants, and Abe often slept in the back room of the store after a long night of reading. After moving to the store, William Berry applied for a liquor license, which cost $7. At that time, the establishment became a tavern as well. But after a year, Berry began drinking heavily, the store began to flounder, and Lincoln sold his share of the business to his partner. After James Rutledge and John Cameron started the town of New Salem in 1829, Rutledge built his residence out of logs. Soon after, James purchased a tavern license, which turned his residence into the village's first and only inn. In this image, I'm standing in front of the reconstructed Rutledge Tavern. James and Mary Ann Rutledge lived in this large tavern with their 10 children, including daughter Anne. Abraham Lincoln briefly boarded in the tavern, which was when his love for Anne Rutledge likely began to blossom. When I stood on the table and saw all the period furnishings around me, my resin mind turned to Anne Rutledge, who must have been very confused during the last years of her life. After all, she was engaged to one man, but had fallen in love with another, and that was 160 years before the public had access to the internet. When I was placed on the bed inside the Rutledge Tavern, I instantly had a vision of Anne Rutledge. The 22-year-old was standing at the foot of the bed, and she appeared to be searching for her lost love, Abraham Lincoln. It was an honor for me to stand close to Abraham Lincoln's personal surveying tools he used in 1833 after he was appointed Deputy Sangamon County Surveyor. Those tools were the only original Lincoln artifacts in the Visitor Center's museum. When a wave of typhoid hit the village of New Salem, 25-year-old Anne Rutledge was one of its victims. Anne died on August 25, 1835, and was laid to rest in the Old Concord Burial Ground just northwest of Petersburg. The Old Concord Burial Ground, which is in the distance behind me, was very difficult to find and was an adventure to access. I'm posing on the empty grave of Anne Rutledge, who was buried here for nearly 55 years following her death. On May 15, 1890, the remains of Rutledge were removed from here and reinterred in Oakland Cemetery in downtown Petersburg. Lincoln remained in New Salem for 2 years following Anne's death. It's been said Abe often came to Anne's grave alone, where he knelt and sobbed at the love he lost. Depressed, Lincoln once said, "I cannot bear to think of her out there alone in the storm." I also saw those words etched onto Rutledge's grave marker. The larger stone to my right marked the grave of Anne's brother, David Hamilton Rutledge, while the smaller stone to my left was where Anne's father, James, was buried. Lincoln was very depressed over the death of Anne Rutledge, and there's reports he even considered suicide in the years following her passing. In fact, on the third anniversary of Anne's death, an unsigned poem appeared in the local newspaper, a paper where Lincoln had published other works. The poem read, "To ease me of this power to think, that through my bosom raves, I'll headlong leap from hell's high brink, and wallow in its waves." As I stood on the spot where Lincoln once wept, it was as though I could see him kneeling beside the grave with a broken heart. I'm standing inside the enclosed plot at Oakland Cemetery where Anne Rutledge was reinterred on May 15, 1890, which was nearly 55 years after her death. As I posed on the final resting place of Anne Rutledge, I noticed her original headstone was in the process of being swallowed up by a large tree. The reason the young Rutledge girl's remains were moved here was citizens of Petersburg figured the grave of Lincoln's love interest would put their small town on the map. And it worked, because here I am. I'm in President's Park, located on the north side of the Rock River in Dixon. This park marks the site of Fort Dixon, where Abraham Lincoln joined the Illinois militia in 1832 during the Black Hawk War. The memorial I'm standing on consists of a full-length bronze figure of Lincoln as a 23-year-old captain during the Black Hawk War. He wears a sword and belt and carries his coat over one arm. Abraham Lincoln was enlisted in the Black Hawk War from April 21st to July 10, 1832, but he saw no combat. Later in life, Lincoln viewed being elected captain of his company by his peers a greater honor than when he was nominated for President of the United States. I'm standing in front of the Illinois State House in Vandalia, which was built in 1836. This was the fourth building to serve as Illinois state capital, but not the last. Abraham Lincoln was elected to the Illinois House of Representatives in 1834. In the fall of 1836, Lincoln arrived in Vandalia and saw this brand new state house waiting for him and his colleagues. While a lot of the interior of the State House had been renovated over the years, this would have been where Lincoln's desk was situated during his time in Congress. This chair represents the one where Lincoln sat when he was a legislator in this room. This likeness of Abraham Lincoln, which portrayed him as he looked in the late 1830s, was situated just outside of the General Assembly chamber inside the State House. Lincoln quickly grew unpopular in Vandalia. In February 1837, Abe led a movement to relocate the state's capital to Springfield, even though this building was new. The vote passed in the legislature, and by 1839, Congress packed up their belongings and moved to the new Capitol building in Springfield. When the capital of Illinois was moved to Springfield in 1837, Abraham Lincoln left New Salem and moved there with it. Today, this building behind me is known as the Old State Capitol, and Lincoln finished out his last term as a state lawmaker here beginning in 1840. As a lawyer, Abe pleaded cases before the state Supreme Court in this building from 1841 to 1860. This historic building remained in legislative use until 1876. This is the House of Representatives chamber inside the old Capitol building. Lincoln not only served his final term as a state legislator in this room, which ended in 1841, it's also the site of Abe's famous House Divided speech in 1858. This was where Lincoln's congressional desk was located, and I'm confident the stovepipe hat was a replica. Abraham Lincoln was 33 when he married the 23-year-old Mary Todd on November 4, 1842, at the bride's sister's house in Springfield. As a young lawyer in Springfield, Lincoln and his partner, Stephen T. Logan, opened their law practice on this building's third floor in 1843. This law office is located across East Adams Street from the old State Capitol building in Springfield. Lincoln continued his practice here with new partner William H. Herndon from 1844 to 1852. I'm standing in the middle of 8th Street in front of Abraham Lincoln's Springfield home. This area is preserved as the Lincoln Home National Historic Site. The dark gray building across Jackson Street behind me was the Charles Arnold House, which was built in 1839 by Reverend Francis Springer, who sold the Lincoln home to Abraham and Mary. After Abraham Lincoln married Mary Todd in 1842, the couple purchased this house behind me in 1844 for $1,500. Abraham, Mary, and their eldest son, Robert Todd, moved into the home on May 2, 1844. When the Lincolns purchased this home in 1844, the building was only 1.5 stories high. During the next 17 years before Abe left for Washington, D.C., his home went through 5 renovations and expansions, which ultimately made it a 2-story residence by 1856. During the summer of 1860, while Lincoln was a Republican candidate for president, Boston photographer John Adams Whipple stood where this large replica camera was and captured several images of Lincoln and 2 of his sons outside of their home. From my position at the corner of 8th and Jackson Streets, it was as though I could see Abe and his two sons as they posed for Whipple. The historic photo captured by John Adams Whipple in 1860. When I was placed on the Lincoln's fence, I had an eerie feeling that Abraham, Willie, and Tad were watching me. This enlarged Whipple image shows Abraham and his sons Willie and Tad, along with the legs of Isaac Diller. I love standing in the footsteps of our presidents, and in this image, I'm posing on the ground where Lincoln was photographed by John Adams Whipple in 1860. Let's go through the doorway behind me and visit the interior of the only home Abraham Lincoln ever owned. The first room I visited was Lincoln's formal parlor, which was separated into the front and back parlor by a large wooden partition. This front parlor was where Abe's second-born son, Eddie's funeral, was held following the boy's death on February 1st, 1850. Eddie suffered for 52 days with tuberculosis and died in the first floor bedroom, which was now the back parlor. Some of the furnishings in the home were original to the Lincolns, including the whatnot shelf against the wall. Mary used that shelf to show off some of her finer items. When the Lincolns bought the house in 1844, this room was a bedroom and was where Eddie, Willie, and Tad were born, and was where Eddie passed away. After the renovation in 1856, this room was transformed into the back parlor. On May 19, 1860, Lincoln was standing near the table behind me when delegates from the Republican convention came to offer Abe the nomination for president. Originally, the house had a large kitchen area where the family dined. This formal dining area I'm standing in was created during the 1856 renovation. The two Hitchcock-style chairs behind me, known as fancy painted chairs, belonged to the Lincolns and were used by the family during meals. The first floor informal parlor, or family sitting room, was where the kids played, read, or wrestled with their father. The stereoscope on the table was purchased by Abraham Lincoln for his boys because he was known to spoil them. In the 1850s, the device cost about $18 to $20, which was equivalent to a laborer's monthly wage. At 6 foot 4 inches tall, Lincoln preferred to lay on the floor where he read poetry, books, or the newspaper aloud. Mary used this sitting room to sew as she repaired socks and torn clothes for the boys and her husband. The fireplace behind me was where the family hung their stockings during Christmas, but they never had a Christmas tree. When it was time to visit the upstairs bedrooms, I was awestruck by the fact that Abraham Lincoln once walked these very steps and grasped that same handrail. I'm in Abraham Lincoln's bedroom, which was separate from his wife Mary's bedroom and typical of the period. While the bed behind me was situated where Abe's bed was located in the room, this one was not original to the Lincoln home, and Mr. Lincoln did not sleep there. And since the bed was only a period piece, there was no reason for me to risk getting in trouble by standing on it. The furniture in Lincoln's bedroom, such as the chest of drawers to my left, were Abraham's. The furniture in his bedroom were not elaborate pieces, but modest, like the man himself. The boots against the wall were Lincoln's riding boots. This pigeonhole desk in the corner of the room was Abe's first desk when he set up business for himself. One story I heard was when the desk was in disrepair and Lincoln had spilled ink on it, Mary threw it in the trash. Abe, not wanting to discard his favorite desk, picked it out of the trash, fixed it, and gave the treasured piece to a neighbor. You might say Abraham Lincoln was one of America's first pickers. I'm in Mary Lincoln's bedroom. The bed to my left was not original to the Lincoln's home. The dresser next to the bed, however, was Mary's. It was built in 1818 or 1820, and she brought it with her from her home in Lexington, Kentucky. The foot bath next to me was where Mary Lincoln bathed, likely once a week, whether she needed it or not. And while most of the family used chamber pots or the exterior outhouse, Mary used the mahogany commode to my left where she did her business. As I stood there, I had an ugly vision of Mary Lincoln as she squatted her chubby butt down on that very commode to log out. In 1856, this room would have been where Robert Todd slept, while his two brothers slept in a trundle bed in their mother's room. But when Robert went off to school, Willie and Tad shared this room from 1860 until they moved to the White House. When I was carried back downstairs, the last room I saw was the kitchen. Mary purchased this $20 stove in June 1860 and had it shipped from Buffalo, New York. Mrs. Lincoln never knew how to cook before she married Abe, but she learned to be a good cook after having a family. I'm standing on the ground where Lincoln walked, played, and did chores. The family had free-range chickens, maybe a pig or two, milk cows, and their horses. Abe loved animals. He owned a dog and had lots of cats. There were two water sources behind me that were used by the family. The one hooked up to the gutter system, which featured a cistern, and the water was used for cleaning. The Lincoln's drinking water came from the well on the right side of this image. And finally, the Lincoln's bathroom, or privy. The outhouse behind me came from a farmer's home in Oakland, Illinois. That farmer was a friend of Abe's, and at times he visited the home when he was riding the circuit. So it's possible Abraham Lincoln had once logged out in that very privy. The Lincoln Privy was a super deluxe model with 3 seats of different sizes. When it came to toilet paper, the Lincolns didn't squeeze the Charmin, but would have used leaves, rags, or corn cobs instead. In 1846, Abraham Lincoln won his state's District 7 election and a seat in the United States House of Representatives. Abe was the only Whig in the Illinois delegation. He participated in almost all votes and made speeches that toed the party line. At his election, Lincoln pledged to serve only one term, which ended on March 3, 1849. When President Zachary Taylor didn't appoint Lincoln to a position he wanted, Abe went back to Springfield and resumed his law practice. In his Springfield practice, Lincoln handled every kind of business that could come before a prairie lawyer. Twice a year for 16 years, he appeared for 10 consecutive weeks in county seats in the mid-state county courts. I'm standing on the grounds where the Logan County Courthouse once stood. The building behind me is an identical replica of the original courthouse. In my mind, it didn't matter if the building was a reproduction because Abraham Lincoln walked on this very ground when he came to Postville twice a year, from 1840 to 1848, to practice law. The original Logan County Courthouse was built in 1840 in the town of Postville. After the building was no longer needed as a courthouse in late 1848, it became a private residence. Unfortunately, the historic courthouse fell into disrepair over the years, and in 1929, the owner of the building, an elderly judge named Timothy Beach, decided to sell the structure, with the hopes the new buyer would renovate it. When automobile business magnate Henry Ford got wind of the sale, he pounced on the opportunity and shelled out $8,000 for the structure on August 18, 1929. On September 11, 1929, workers began to dismantle the Logan County Courthouse for its trip to Michigan, where it was reassembled in Ford's Greenfield Village. Logan County Courthouse, September 1929. When Ford bought the Logan County Courthouse in 1929, he had the foundation and ground beneath the building dug up and moved to Greenfield Village. Today, the courthouse sits on Lincoln, Illinois soil. As I looked at the historic courthouse behind me, I thought of Abraham Lincoln and his twice-a-year visits to the building while serving the 8th Judicial Circuit in Illinois. The young lawyer had once walked through the doorway. He walked on those very floorboards, and he gazed at those same walls as he was gaining fame as an efficient lawyer. Let's walk through the same front door as Lincoln did and see the interior of the original Logan County Courthouse, where the one-time rail splitter began to earn the nickname Honest Abe. I'm standing inside the original Logan County Courthouse that's decked out with courthouse furnishings from the 1840s. The cabinet behind me, in the corner, was built by Thomas Lincoln with the help of his son Abraham. During my time inside the historic courthouse, I had wished Henry Ford would have left the building in Lincoln, Illinois. The Mount Pulaski Courthouse was built in 1848 as a replacement for the wooden Logan County Courthouse in nearby Postville, which was always at risk of fire. From the time it opened until 1853, the courthouse in Mount Pulaski was visited by Prairie lawyer Abraham Lincoln as he made his twice-a-year rounds of the 8th Judicial Circuit. Mount Pulaski was only 25 miles north of Lincoln's home in Springfield, but it was a full day's journey by the horse and light buggy Abe used. Today, the Mount Pulaski Courthouse and the Metamora Courthouse are the only two surviving Illinois courthouses where Lincoln practiced law that still remain on their original foundations. Unfortunately, this historic building closed as a courthouse in 1853 when the county seat moved to Lincoln. After that, it served as a school, the Mount Pulaski City Hall and Jail, and the local post office. Little to nothing is known about Lincoln's legal cases at the courthouse, as a fire in another building in 1857 destroyed all of the relocated county records. Let's go up the steps, through the doorway, and walk in the footsteps of Abraham Lincoln. Once inside, I posed for this image on the original staircase that led to the second floor courtroom. In my mind's eye, I envisioned the tall and lanky lawyer as he held the handrails and slowly took each step one at a time on his way to work. It was an honor for me to stand on the original courtroom table once used by Abraham Lincoln when he prepared his legal cases for trial. While there was no way to know for sure, our tour guide said Abe very likely sat at this spot where I'm standing in this image. The small walkway where I'm standing was where Lincoln walked from his table to the witness stand or when he pleaded his case to the jury. The Prairie lawyer would have also stood in the same spot when he addressed the judge. I'm standing on the original floorboards where Lincoln walked and likely paced back and forth in the Mount Pulaski courtroom. From my position on the court recorder's table, it was easy to see the chairs in the far corner of the room which were used by the jury. With the 30-star American flag of 1848 behind me, I stood on the witness stand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. It was here on October 16, 1854, when Abraham Lincoln delivered his Peoria speech in the midst of the struggle against slavery and its extension. Near this spot, outside the original Peoria County Courthouse, Lincoln drew the line against the extension of slavery. Abraham Lincoln's attacks on the Kansas-Nebraska Act marked his return to political life, and he used that platform to catapult his ambitious efforts towards the White House just 6 years later. To commemorate Lincoln's Peoria speech, a bronze statue called "Lincoln Draws the Line" was created by sculptor John McClary and was dedicated on October 14, 2001. The original Peoria County Courthouse, where Lincoln drew the line against slavery. In 1856, which was the same year Abraham Lincoln abandoned the Whig Party and joined the newly formed Republican Party, the up-and-coming politician donned his lawyer's hat and arrived in Davenport to investigate one of his most famous legal cases along the Mississippi River. I'm standing on the Lincoln with Boy on Bridge statue located in Davenport's Bechtel Park. The Arsenal Bridge, which was built in 1895, spanned the Mississippi River in the background. Lincoln had made the trip to Davenport to investigate the facts after a riverboat collided with the Arsenal Bridge. Legend has it Lincoln accidentally met with and talked to a young boy when the lawyer came to the bridge during his pre-trial fact-finding investigation. The boy was reputed to be the son of the engineer who designed the original bridge. In the end, thanks to Lincoln's brilliant arguments during the trial, the bridge was allowed to stay in place. As I looked up at the 13-foot tall bronze image of Lincoln, it was as though I could hear him say, "I'm mighty glad I came out here where I can get a little less opinion and a little more fact." I'm standing in front of the Metamora Courthouse, which was built in 1845 as the governmental center for Woodford County and as a circuit court for the former Illinois 8th Circuit. Today, the courthouse is best known for being one of the only two surviving Illinois Circuit courthouses where future U.S. President Abraham Lincoln practiced law. On April 14, 1857, 70-year-old Melissa Goings clobbered her husband Roswell over the head with a chunk of firewood after the well-to-do farmer and heavy drinker tried to strangle her. A few days later, the well-known wife-beater died from his injuries, and Melissa was charged with first-degree murder. Mrs. Goings' trial date was set for October 10, 1857, which set the stage for the famous lawyer from the Lincoln and Herndon law firm, Abraham Lincoln. As the well-publicized trial proceeded, Melissa Goings suddenly disappeared during a short recess. When the judge asked Lincoln where his client was, Abe's wit emerged after the bailiff accused the lawyer of running her off. Lincoln stood up and said to the judge, "Your Honor, I did not chase her off. She simply asked me where she could get a good drink of water, and I said, 'Tennessee has mighty fine drinking water.'" As I stood on the window ledge, I envisioned Abraham Lincoln as he walked out of the courthouse with Melissa Goings on October 10, 1857, to discuss their legal options. And I admit, Melissa looked mighty thirsty. 14 years after the building behind me was constructed in 1844, the Cass County Courthouse became known as the Almanac Trial Courthouse. The famous trial involving Lincoln came after a 24-year-old young man named William Duff Armstrong had been charged with murder on August 29, 1857, by striking James Preston Metzger with several blows to the head. When the trial began on May 8, 1858, one person was called to the stand as an eyewitness. The witness, Charles Allen, testified under oath that he saw Armstrong strike Metzger with the weapon, even though it was 11 o'clock at night and he was 150 feet away. Under cross-examination by Abe, the witness claimed that while he was a long ways away, he could see clearly because of the evening's bright moonlight. Lincoln acted quickly and produced an almanac, which he opened to the two calendar pages from August 1857. That almanac proved the moon was about to set at the precise time of the murder. When Abe entered the almanac pages as evidence, the judge agreed and the jury found the defendant not guilty. Thanks to the quick and creative thinking by Lincoln, Duff Armstrong was acquitted. Lincoln during the famous Almanac trial. I laughed to myself when I thought I heard a voice shout out from the second floor, "If the moon wasn't lit, you must acquit." After Lincoln accepted the Republican Party's nomination to run against Stephen Douglas for the United States Senate, Abe delivered his acceptance speech in the House chamber in the state capitol building behind me. Lincoln's address, delivered on June 16, 1858, became known as his House Divided speech. Although Abe lost the election to Douglas, the speech served as the final stepping stone to his election as president just 2 years later. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. Lincoln delivered his historic speech on June 16, 1858, in front of the original portrait of George Washington, which hung behind me. Lincoln as he delivered his House Divided speech, June 16, 1858. When I was carried to what was believed to be the library, I stood on a table once used by Abraham Lincoln when he wrote his House Divided speech. This room in the old Capitol was the reception area to the governor's office. Abraham Lincoln used this room as his informal headquarters for his 1860 presidential campaign. Abraham Lincoln as he met people in the reception room during his 1860 campaign for president. This pot, made for holding hot water, was in that reception room when Abraham Lincoln was there. The same pot can be seen in the illustration, which I thought was incredibly cool. When the votes were counted after Election Day on November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican elected as president. Lincoln scored 180 electoral votes, compared to Southern Democrat John C. Breckinridge, who only had 72. The other two candidates were John Bell, who finished with 39 electoral votes, while rival Democrat Stephen A. Douglas finished fourth with 12. It was February 11, 1861, a day before Lincoln's 52nd birthday, when the president-elect arrived at the Great Western Depot, located just 2 blocks from his Springfield home. A large crowd of several thousand citizens gathered at the station to see their native son as he headed to Washington for his inauguration. Lincoln boarded the train for the 12-day trip to our nation's capital, but before the train left, Abe stood on the back railroad car and delivered an emotional speech in a heavy rainstorm. Lincoln said in part, "My friends, no one, not in my situation, can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting. To this place and the kindness of these people, I owe everything. Here I have lived a quarter of a century and have passed from a young to an old man. Here my children have been born, and one is buried. I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return, with a task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington." Lincoln, as he delivered his farewell to Springfield speech, February 11, 1861. Lincoln finished with, "As I hope in your prayers you will commend me, I bid you an affectionate farewell." The speech was incredibly emotional, and it's likely the president-elect felt he would never see Springfield again. Five days after Lincoln had departed Springfield, his train made a brief stop at the Westfield train station. Westfield is located roughly 60 miles south of Buffalo. During that stop on February 16, 1861, the president-elect delivered a short speech. When he was finished, Lincoln asked 11-year-old Grace Bedell to come up onto the platform. It turned out young Grace had written a letter to Lincoln on October 15, 1860, and suggested he grow whiskers because the ladies would like him better and convince their husbands to vote for him. This home in Westfield was where Grace Bedell lived and wrote her letter that changed the face of history. This was the last beardless photo of Lincoln, August 13, 1860. Lincoln 5 weeks after receiving Grace Bedell's letter, November 25, 1860. Lincoln 1 week before he met Grace in Westfield, February 9, 1861. I'm posing on a statue depicting the historic meeting between Lincoln and Grace. The statue is located roughly 4 blocks from the train station in downtown Westfield. On his way to his inauguration in Washington, Lincoln's train stopped in Philadelphia where the president-elect was asked to raise the flag over Independence Hall. Lincoln stood on a platform above this plaque on February 22, 1861, where he spoke to a very large crowd of spectators. President-elect Lincoln raises the flag over Independence Hall, February 22, 1861. I wanted to stand in the footsteps of Lincoln, but unfortunately, Abe raised the flag from a platform and likely never set foot where I'm posing. After leaving Harrisburg, Pennsylvania on the evening of February 22, 1861, President-elect Lincoln arrived in Washington, D.C. the following day at 6 a.m. Lincoln had worn a disguise due to an assassination threat. Upon arrival, Lincoln was escorted to the Willard Hotel by his friend, Congressman Elihu B. Washburn from Illinois. Politician Thurlow Weed of New York reserved the best rooms available for the first family, parlor number 6, a large, pricey corner suite on the second floor. During their 10-day stay, the Lincolns entertained a wide variety of visitors in their suite and the hotel's public room. Among the callers were all 3 defeated candidates from the 1860 presidential election, Stephen Douglas, John Bell, and John Breckinridge. Lincoln used his hotel stay to conduct official business, complete his cabinet appointments, and make adjustments to the first inaugural address, which he had written in Illinois. By the time the inauguration rolled around, the hotel overflowed with visitors, squeezing as many as 10 people into a room. At noon on March 4th, Lincoln left the hotel with outgoing President Buchanan to ride down Pennsylvania Avenue en route to the Capitol. According to hotel records, President Lincoln returned to the hotel after the inaugural ceremonies to watch the parade and enjoy his inaugural luncheon. The luncheon menu consisted of mock turtle soup, corned beef and cabbage, parsley potatoes, and blackberry pie. On March 4th, 1861, Abraham Lincoln stood on the east portico of the United States Capitol, where he recited the presidential oath of office. With his new whiskers, thanks to Grace Bedell, Lincoln became the first president to sport any facial hair other than sideburns. Inauguration of Abraham Lincoln, March 4th, 1861. Well, are you still awake? That's it for part 1 of Jefferson's salute to Abraham Lincoln. Part 2 will pick up from his first inauguration and take you on an incredible adventure through his entire historic presidency. Please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button and share this episode with your friends on social media. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you back for the conclusion of our tribute to Abraham Lincoln. It'll be one show you won't want to miss. Honest.